So, joining me on this episode of the Neil Wilkins podcast, I'm delighted to welcome Andrew Ronchetto. Now, Andrew is the founder of Beyond. Beyond is a productivity focused platform, but not just about productivity. This is a platform that seamlessly integrates wellness, coaching, and organization tools into a single solution. And this, for me, is one of the missing pieces in the whole holistic wellness jigsaw. So, welcome to the show, Andrew.
Thank you, Neil, for having me here. I'm really excited to talk with you and share with your listeners about what we're doing and also how important this is in today's world with everything going on.
It is, and I think there's never been a better time. I often find myself saying this at the moment, this kind of idea of a perfect storm. It feels like the tech, the politics, the economy, people, anxiety, well-being. It's just all of these things seem to be like hot topics that are almost coming together at this point in time, I guess, of human history to have this almost crescendo of an opportunity, but also some big challenges. Is that kind of how you're seeing it playing out?
A little bit. And I think what's interesting for me is I'm coming at it from a slightly different angle because I kind of got thrust into this from, I'll say, my personal experiences. I had gotten hurt a couple years ago, and I tell people I'm still on like my 2-year recovery journey. So I've got a long way to go. But part of this is, I think, is this recognition that I don't know that I would say it's doom and gloom out in the world, but I think we're coming to this more conscious state with ourselves around what is happening in our lives, what's being productive, what is taking away from that or making us unhappy. And I think we're looking to make a change with that. And some of it can be generational. We can talk about that a little bit and what it means in the workforce and how that's probably played a little bit of a role getting us to the point that we're at. But I think another part of it is we're starting to appreciate what it means to just have like fresh air in our lives and being able to walk down the street or take a quick walk for a meeting instead of being stuck at a desk or stuck in a meeting room. And I think all these things coming out of the pandemic have really opened our eyes to an alternative. It doesn't mean we want to be less productive. It doesn't mean we want to be less engaged. I think it just means we want to engage differently. And I think we're trying to all reconcile what that looks like and be contributors to society and have fun and joy in our lives, because for some of us we realize it's just life is too short.
It's balance, isn't it, really? Because I think what you've just described there, this whole kind of work-life thing and survival, I think, for some of us, and thriving for others. I think it is about balance, isn't it? Because you can throw yourself into this stuff from a career development or a professional sense and almost lose sight of the fact, but you've still got to take care of self. Or you can completely immerse in self and forget that actually you've got to put food on the table. It's kind of hard to kind of get that balance right, isn't it?
It is. And what's interesting is I think part of it is because we think about it so much subconsciously that it really hasn't started till of late, I would say, become more of a conscious decision for us. So a great example of that, I was talking with some different folks in PR and about Beyond and whatnot and what we're trying to do. But I asked them straight up, I was like, what do you know about holistic wellness? Almost like it was an interview, so to say. And they're like, well, I know there's like the physical component. I know there's like the mental or the spiritual. And I was like, and and part of it is why I asked that question, because it's not uncommon. It's not a ding on them, but there's 5 other dimensions that we sometimes forget to talk about. And I think it's exactly what you're going at, is this balance. So beyond the physical, beyond the mental, beyond the spiritual, there's career, which for some of us is like a third of our life. So we can't forget about that, and it is an important element. But then there's financials, like you talked about putting food on the table. So financials is a part of that. Social, our relationships with ourselves, with our significant others, with our friends, our extended family, so on and so forth. And then there's things like the intellectual, and then there's even the environmental. So this idea of, are you happy with where you live or the environment you're putting yourself into? We see all the changes happening at work for collab spaces and whatnot like that. But part of it is because it's an important element of creating this balance. And I think what some people start to realize, and I go back to my experiences, if I tell people, I'm like, if it were a sunburst chart, Like my career thing would be way out there. The data point would be so far out there. Everything else is just shrunk into the center. And that's where the imbalance creates. It's not something that happens instantaneous. So it's like, today I was just out of sync. And you might be, but it doesn't mean you're out of balance. That imbalance that gets created is something that can happen more long term. And if we don't correct it in that kind of long term basis, we as humans might be able to, and we see it all the time, with how much people go to the extreme, whether it's in sports or whatever. But at some point, we got to bring ourselves back to the center and start to flex our muscles in those other dimensions, because that's where we actually start to create the balance for ourselves and what it means for us, so that we can then support others. We can be a part of our community and contribute to our community, whether it's through work or our family and whatnot. So that balance is critical, and sometimes we forget about all of those dimensions because we're so focused on one. But it just is important to always kind of reflect and come back to the center so that we can flex the others, like I was talking about.
I want to go into the whole kind of sort of personalized thing, the whole personalization of this, because I guess, Andrew, for, what might apply to you might not apply to me, might not apply to the next person. There is this kind of individualistic thing that comes in. I know there's obviously some basic principles that we all need to apply, but then it comes down to the personal kind of desires and preferences and what we're good at and all that kind of stuff. I'm interested, though, before we get into that, just really to explore this idea of focusing in on something. I mean, I just, as you were describing that, I had this kind of memory really come through of, a particular session in the gym, and I was listening to these two guys talking, and one was saying, oh yeah, today is legs. I'm doing legs today. Now, when I go to the gym, or if I'm out, doing sports or whatever, I'm thinking about a whole body workout. I'm thinking about really tiring myself out, getting fit, doing some stuff. I'm not focusing in on one kind of area of my body or my psyche in isolation. I'm trying to do the whole thing. Is there a thing, the way you just described it there, to actually focus in on one thing? Because I know obviously when you're training for a particular kind of event or particular sport, there is this sort of guidance, I guess, that is, okay, you do one muscle group at a time, and et cetera, et cetera. But are we talking about here, when we talk holistic kind of wellness and holistic fitness, I guess you could say as well, are we talking about the big picture all the time, or do we drill down into individual things based on that balance you're describing?
It's a great question. And I think it's a little bit of both. So I'm going to take this from a slightly different angle, real quick, and talk about strategy. We all love strategy, but we hate planning. So, like, to your point, you want to go after, and maybe you're training for an event, like you were talking about. Maybe you love to run. I know I do. I don't do enough. I want to do more. It's just not into my practices the way I want it to be yet. I think that extends to the next part of our question, our conversation, for sure. But to talk about strategy for a moment, I think we don't do enough of an evaluation of the big picture. And sometimes we get so deep into one dimension or another that we lose sight of that big picture. We're going through university and whatnot, and everybody's like, well, what are your goals for the next 5 years? And you're like, I don't know. Like, we'll come up with them. Well, I don't know. Like there's this massive struggle. And I think it's partly because we're framing the conversation a little bit wrong. Like, when we talk about strategy and planning on a personal level, I think it's coming back to our own personal why, the things that motivate us, that we see valuable. Like, when I talk about running, I didn't enjoy running because I was burning myself out. I got a ton of, excitement and energy from that, even though I just burned a whole bunch. But the adrenaline and whatnot that comes from it. But what I enjoyed most about running was this idea that I could spend time with close friends, and we could talk and have this shared experience of the pain, but laughing about it. It's like, In my case, we wanted to go get a glass of wine afterwards, like that was our thing. And that's what I appreciated about running. So my purpose and the value of it, and what was important to me was that connection that I was making with other people. And I think that's where the strategy comes in a little bit here, is us understanding the macro aspect of why we want to do something, and understanding that. Then, to your point, we can go into the micro. And I think this is that flex. We don't always want to talk about macro every day of our life. We just wouldn't get anything done. But if we always talked about micro, we might be getting a whole bunch of stuff done, but deviating off into a path or in a space that we don't actually want to be. And so there's we talk about this a lot in planning, is you want to plan, and then you want to basically every so often replan to bring yourself back to the original, or some new version of the original. It doesn't always have to be that you either do or don't complete what you're talking about. So it is important that we talk about planning, we talk about the macro, and then we start to execute, so to say. And I know I'm using a lot of project management terms in this, and I don't want it to feel like it's just this repetitive task or something that it's just you'd actually do, but we make a lot of decisions off of this idea of, how do I make it repetitious, our practices? How do I incorporate it into my life? That I have dinner with my family at the table every night, whatever it might be. These are intentional things that are important to you. So it starts to define your why. It starts to define your purpose. And I think this is where we start to say how it materializes in your actions and your practices, the things you do, is where we start to see rubber hit the road and, outcomes. And so this is where that balance comes in, planning a little, but then also executing, and then coming back and recognizing what's working and what isn't.
I love that filter, because that's what it is, isn't it, really? Once you've got the purpose, why, North Star, whatever you want to call it, the vision, that bit, as you say, that big macro kind of light in front of you that says, okay, no matter what happens today, I know that that's still there. I can still focus and point in that direction. There's a real kind of level of comfort, I guess, in that, isn't there? That it's like, it's okay, I've had a bit of a bad day, but it doesn't matter, because I'm on the right journey. I'm facing in the right direction. The sail is set, the rudder's kind of adjusted. I'm going in the right direction. And that I think, particularly in those challenging days or those challenging moments, professionally or personally, we need that, don't we? Because it's going to be up and down. There's no way that, no matter what Neil and Andrew say on this podcast, is going to make every single day perfect. It just isn't life, is it? So having that North Star, that why, gives you that filter to make smart decisions, but also it just keeps that momentum. It's almost like the reward, isn't it?
Yes. And I think it's so important, because there's something to be said about your own beliefs. If you feel like you're always going to be able to accomplish things, that kind of self reinforces itself. And that positive experience can really drive itself throughout all aspects of your life. But the same can be said if you're really feeling down about yourself as well. That negative reinforcement can also play out. I'll never get to the gym, or I'll never get to the church, or I'll never have a great job, or and these are all adjectives, like I'll never have a great job. Well, what is a great job for you? What does that job need to be for it to feel fulfilling? And these are deeper, harder questions to answer. And I think they change over time as well. So part of setting the North Star, like you said, or setting a vision, is really just in helping yourself guide yourself through all these things happening in life. And you might not enjoy all of them. You might not be happy about all of them. But in having that vision, you're able to then say, do I want to change it? Do I want to evolve it? And for me personally, that's been huge, because, like I said, I'm on this 2-year recovery journey. I probably got the rest of my life of recovery, if I were to think about it that way. But I don't think about it in a negative way. I think about it in the sense of, I was at a point in my life where I got hurt, and it had a massive impact career. It had an impact on my relationships. I couldn't pick up my daughters, because my back was hurt. Like, I was fortunate, I didn't have a heart attack or a stroke or something like sometimes people do, and then start to focus on how out of balance they were. But the point being here is, it made me reflect on a lot of different areas and take a moment to pause, which I wasn't doing. And because of that, now I've started to really think about what are the things that are so critical and important in my life and coming back to my why. And then secondly, like I mentioned, I want to run more. I just haven't figured out how to get it into everything else I'm doing. And I'm not upset about that. I want to do it. Do not get me wrong. I'm like trying to move it up on the priority list, you know? I just haven't gotten it there yet, but I'm okay with it because it's getting there and I recognize it. I'm consciously, accepting where I'm at with it. And because of that, I'm happier actually, ironically. Like it sounds like the opposite of what should be happening. But because I'm consciously making these decisions and these trade offs rather than subconsciously, like, oh, yeah, I got 15 more minutes. I can get a quick run in when you're really 3 hours behind and stressed out to all belief. I'm consciously making it. And because of that, I just have a different outlook on life and where I'm at and what I'm enjoying, what I'm not. And I think that's the whole intentionality behind this.
There's something really practical about what you just said there. This whole thing about prioritizing. It feels that you kind of almost want to get ahead of this because, obviously we don't wish any kind of accident or incident or, sort of tragedy to befall anybody. So it's almost trying to get ahead of this and actually doing it today, doing it now, so that you're ready with the North Star, the vision, the macro, and then starting to build those really good habits and build those priorities so that you're not wasting time, you're investing your time in stuff that's going to support the direction you want to go in. I think this is what we're talking about when we say holistic, aren't we? Is because it means that everything is kind of nicely aligned. Doesn't mean you're going to get it right all the time, but it's just that everything is supporting everything else. And if something comes in from left field and you can look at it and you can think, okay, does that now have a part to play in my world? Yes. Okay, it makes it. No, it doesn't. Okay, it doesn't make the cut. And it allows you to make those decisions literally day by day, moment by moment, I guess.
Yeah, and I think you said something that's so important in this is it's helping us react to what's happening because life is not perfect. Like we're not machines, we're not robots. Every second isn't accounted for in ones and zeros. Like we had a lot of traffic on the way home. The amount of time we can spend at the dinner table before we got to jet off to the next, community meeting or workout session or whatever it might be that's in our life. These things can really set some stress in our life, and so part of this is trying to be intentional about it so we actually can enjoy life more and like you said, account for the things that are maybe upsetting the balance, so to say. But yeah, one way I'll take it is this can be applied both in personal and professional development. And I'm going to use the example here because I think this is so fundamental to what we're talking about and also easy to implement today versus something it's like, well, you got to think about it for 3 days and then, look back for another 5 days and then meditate and, talk to an advisor and so on. No, like the thing I kind of suggest to people here is think about everything you do on a regular basis. So maybe we have two buckets. Let's keep it simple here. The things I do during the work week because I work. And so, there's a different schedule I tend to host on that day, those days, versus the weekends, the time I get for myself and my family. And let's say you have an amount of energy, rather than let's talk about hours, but an amount of energy is where do I want to spend that energy? And this is where we start to talk about practices. Well, some of that is on the work week. I want to put energy into my job. I want to be successful there. And so there's a degree of that we burn down on. I want to spend time with my family eating at the kitchen table. So therefore I got to cook or I want to work out. So if we start thinking about all these practices and we can kind of start grouping them into what's there, we start to think about, well, what's left? And really, for a lot of folks, there's not a lot left at the end of the day once you start to add all those items up, and that's okay. But because now you're consciously aware of what all those items are, you got to drive to work or take the bus or the train, whatever it might be, or you need to walk, or you want to get in an exercise. Like all these things take time, take energy to implement. And so now that you have this visualization of it, you can say, okay, that's my ideal, maybe. Or how does it deviate from my ideal? So that's like we were talking about the prioritization. So now we start to say the things at the top of the list are most important for me. So in my case, I wasn't getting enough sleep. So I focus a lot on, sleep, eating, drinking water, and then, the rest starts to play out from there. Those physical things are very important to me. But then everything else kind of prioritizes. So where the line draws, because I just don't have any more time or energy, is where then when they say, are we okay with what's below it? Or what do we want to move below the line to bring something up? And this is, I think, something we can just do today, actually. Like, it's not something we have to really think about. And why this is so important in our personal life is because it can help us understand how we're spending our time. Do I want to watch TV or read a book or, making the next, hit app, whatever it might be. And then on the same on the weekends. And the reason why I say we can play this out in the job as well is because we don't do it enough there. We get a set of job responsibilities. We presume that translates into the same job we've been hired for and the activities we're going to do. And then there's the review process. But what's constant, at least for a lot of folks, is the three are very disconnected. What you said I was going to do versus what you're telling me what I need to do versus what I'm actually doing is disconnected. And that stress can really, build up over time at work. So even taking the same, I'll say, activity and applying it into work to say where all the buckets of my time are, my energy are going to while I'm at work is something I can fundamentally then use in my review process. Say, if I'm not getting after the things you want me to do, what of these things that I'm actually doing needs to go away so I can do the other things you want me to do? And we can start having these constructive conversations, both in the workforce, but also in our personal lives to get after what's important.
Is there kind of time? I just challenge on this one. Is there time as an employer then hearing this? So Andrew comes to me, to do this particular role, clearly qualified, has all these preferences, has this North Star vision, considering the macro, all these priorities, this lifestyle, this requirement of how Andrew wants to spend time. And then Neil comes to me, and Neil's got all his stuff as well, and somebody else comes to me and they've got all their stuff. Is there time for an employer to accommodate all of this? Because of course what they're looking for is, I need this job done efficiently, I need to be returning the sales, or I need to be hitting these productivity targets, or whatever it happens to be based on the role. Is there time to actually consider the human?
I don't think we can accept anymore that we don't make time for it. We talk a lot about the importance of execution and productivity, but the element of the equation that's missing in there is the human element. We talk about how many items you did, how much time it took you to do it, and then the quality of it. And you're like, well, there's the outcome, the performance, and voila. Except the problem is when that team was sprinting to go get it done because this was an MVP. So you want to figure out whether to keep it or jettison it as quickly as possible. And you realize it's great. And now you want to scale it up. That same speed and quality that may have existed in that first, I'll say run at it is not going to be the same speed and quality in the second run. And this is the human element of it. And so the thing that I try to express to employers is, I get it. There is outcomes that you have to drive towards. And there are short-term and long-term components of all of this. But your biggest asset is your people. Whether you want to agree with that or not, there's no amount of automation that can completely replace your workforce. Not today, at least. And even though we're talking about AI agents and 2025, and we've been talking about, robotic process automation for years and other aspects of AI for a long time, some of the undertones that still exist in there is you need people to maintain it. You need people to ensure that it's actually still operating the way it needs to. And then you need to make sure that it's actually delivering the value you need to. So the people aspect of it is so fundamentally important to your organization. It might shape and evolve and change over time, but you don't lose it. And so not taking care of those people, and Yeah, it's hard. Like managing people is not an easy thing. I think we do a discredit to a lot of middle managers where we say, hey, congratulations, here's the pay bump. And now here's the 15 people that report to you. And that's the end of the conversation. We don't train them enough. We don't coach them on how to move through those conversations. And so they're kind of winging it. And it has this cascading effect of impact on everybody in the conversation. You've got senior leadership with these high expectations, and I don't think they should be anything less. You've got employees trying to just hold on to life and that balance that they're looking for in themselves. And then you got middle managers trying to avoid being squeezed from both sides. And this is where I would say where we start to change the conversation is by having the human conversation. Because if I can help arbitrarily, Sue focus more on being efficient because I taught her how to use an automation tool to do her same job, then that's something as a manager, I've trained her to do something new that she may not have thought she was capable of doing, but now she's doing her job better. And it might have excited her. It might have propelled her to think about things a little bit differently. And that human element is the whole reason why that was possible. So I don't think we can discount it any more than we may have in the past, because we're looking to run leaner and meaner, as you hear everybody say. But you need people in order to do that. So I think this is the time more than ever that you need to focus on the human element, because the lack thereof just says you're really just trying to remove all the waste which may have existed there. And I don't mean to say it in a negative way like that. I think you're looking for inefficiencies in an organization, but the fact that you're removing those inefficiencies as they're perceived by you, whether they exist or not, is not the debate. What you're coming down to is a smaller set of people trying to get the same outcomes. And you really need to focus on them so you don't burn them out. One last thing I'll throw out to this here that I was amazed hearing it, even though I hadn't heard it before, is somebody said, don't take your best employees who are super efficient. Maybe they get the job you hired them to done in 75% of the time, and then load them up with another 50, 60% of work. Because all you're going to do to that employee is burn them out. And now you've taken a very highly skilled, highly capable employee, and you might have lost them. So we need to think about these things, and it's complex, which is why it needs to be hyper personalized, and why we need to start thinking about what it means in the workforce to take the individual component into account. It doesn't mean we also, I'm going to, flip it to the manager side. It doesn't mean I am accommodating to everything, because we still got to get a job done. But I think it's the recognition at this point where we start to say, here's the transparency, what we're trying to do. How do I build trust with you? Because it's not built day one. How do I create vulnerability in our relationship so that I'm trying to do the things that are important for you as well as for the company? And then how do we move forward together? I think these things are so fundamental to the success of businesses today in creating high-performing teams and highly capable individuals that are happy and balanced. And it's a lot of work, and we got to do more of it.
Yeah, you've used the phrase there, hyper personalized, and I think there it is. There's the target. I think for any employer listening to this, or any HR professional, or any manager, anybody in some kind of level of being responsible for others, is that hyper personalization as far as you can. I mean, again, we're setting a really high bar here, aren't we, as we talk about this, because that requires a lot of attention, a lot of focus. And you use the word vulnerability there. There's a real kind of honesty in that trade, isn't there, between employer and employee, or manager and, we'll call them subordinate, but the person who's working for that manager. There is a lot of honesty and authenticity that needs to go into it. And if we're going to go in for this hyper personalization, to me, the first thing that jumps to me is, because I've always been kind of forced to do this throughout my life, is just this whole idea of being, a profound introvert in a very extrovert world. And of course, everybody then says, oh, we'll get everyone around and we'll do some team building. As an introvert, I really, really dislike team building. I'm an introvert. It's the opposite end of my preference spectrum. But that's not an organization being hyper personalized, is it? Is there room to almost let people off for things that are outside of their preferences? Because if we're doing this properly, it should really be down to an individual level, shouldn't it?
It should be. And this is where, I'll say it this way, and we see these anomalies throughout the world. There was a recent startup that said, with 10 people, we built like $1 billion company. You're like, whoa, that's amazing. Like, tell me more. And I'm not saying this to suggest that every company can be 10 people, but I think in that particular example, and I'd love to see them 6 months, a year down the road, but in that particular example, just taking where they're at right now, everybody had a specific purpose within the company, had a specific set of activities they could really, focus in. And that there wasn't a lot of gap, let's say, between what was expected and what was happening. And I think that's how they were able to achieve so much in such a short amount of time. They became high performing in some ways, possibly because they were hyper focused on your skill sets, your capabilities. And the thing about this for me is you can do this. Like, you talk about being an introvert. I'm an introvert as well. I'm kind of more in the middle, almost going over the other side, to talk about it in many different spectrums there. But the point being is trust falls were never my thing. Is somebody being there, you're like, well, you'll trust your team more if they don't drop you. Well, what if somebody trips, the light blinds? Like, what if 1,000 potential things happen, which is life, which is work? I mean, you can't account for all of it. And so trust isn't built in that one moment to say whether they saved you from hitting the floor. Trust is built from you hit the floor, you hit your lowest point, and how I'm helping you build yourself back up. How I'm not just going to let you go because you had a moment of weakness or a struggle. Like, I think this is where we start to say it matters more to how we build our teams. And our teams are built by very different people. I've had some teams in the past where we've done some amazing stuff and widely different experiences, widely different, I'll say, complexes. Some people outgoing, some people introverted, some people super technical, some people just all about people. I mean, you name it, the whole spectrum. But one of the things that we talked about is how can we bring you together so you can all work together? How can your skill sets offset those of another? How can we both get the same, get to the output together? So we were operating as a team. Even though we each had individual things we need to get done, we leaned on each other. Hey, can you help me with this PowerPoint? Hey, can you help me build this automation? Whatever it might be, we did it together, and then we celebrated the individual wins. Everybody got to have their moment in the spotlight because it still was their activity at the end of the day. But what you saw immediately is like, well, I also have to thank so and so, almost like it was the Academy Awards because there's so many people behind it. And I think that's where we start to build these teams. And it's more than just grabbing drinks after work or a trust fall or going axe throwing. I mean, there's so many extremes out there today. I think we have to start saying, and in my case, when I was bringing my team together, I'd say like, well, what do we want to do? We haven't done anything together as a team in a while. So, sometimes we would do something that somebody liked a lot of, but then the next time we would do something that somebody else liked. And we just tried to get into this balance that we recognized each of us have these different things that excite us. And we really tried to share those as well as then celebrate those as a means of what made our team strong. And I think that's where the human element starts to come out more.
You've used the kind of phrase, well, right at the start of our conversation, you talked about there being potentially generational differences here. I mean, certainly the thing that I've picked up and seen with clients and certainly experienced in the past, and this is going back a long, long time, is I see very much the old school kind of approach to this kind of topic would be to brush it under the carpet. It's like, no, strength is all about working the long, hard hours. It's not about vulnerability. That's a weakness. Whereas I think we've seen in more recent times, certainly over the last, say, 5 to 10 years, and maybe part of this emerging new generation of business decision makers and people who are kind of really taking the reins of budget and managing teams and things, we've seen this as being almost celebrated. Well-being is now right at the forefront of things you consider when you're measuring performance of your team or your business. Are you seeing similar kinds of patterns, that things like vulnerability and openness are now celebrated rather than almost condemned as they were in the past?
Yes, I am. I would say it's also we still have a long way to go. So I think about Europe, for example. I would say well-being has very much been more at the forefront than other regions of the world. I think we're starting to see more of it in the US, but it has this competing element as almost a yin and yang between it and capitalism without us going down a whole, rabbit hole on the conversation. But I do see it playing out more. We don't see it as much in Asia, although it's a topic that is growing more. And so I think the point of this is we're seeing aspects of it play out, and we're seeing companies and leaders who, because they've probably experienced it themselves and seen the outcomes from that, decided that this is a better way to go about it. I know that is for me the case. But yes, there's still a lot of old school. And the thing I'll tell people, because I've been consulting for a while, this generational gap, I think, is something we don't lean enough into. And it might sound crazy because everybody just talks about it as like, well, how do I take all the wealth of information from the folks leaving the workforce and just instill it in everybody else below it, as if nothing's going to change over the next 50 years. And I'm like, guys, like, yes, it's important to have the knowledge, but knowledge doesn't create understanding. Knowledge plus experience can create understanding, and understanding can be applied, to those experiences. So it creates a cycle in there. But the other part of this is what is needed or wanted in the different generations is vastly different. So I could hire, somebody in an analyst role that's in their 50s, maybe 60s. But I could also hire another person that's in their 20s, depending on the job responsibilities, to apply the same role. And hiring one or the other can vastly change the dynamics of my team. And I think that diversity of thought is something we need to celebrate, because it allows us to not get stuck in a corner about how we would perceive things, but I think start to take into account what others have learned or are learning, or are coming into the workforce to learn, to really fundamentally make our team stronger, to make our company stronger, because this is a long-term play at that point. I don't expect that everybody's going to stay with the same company for their entire career. I know that was very much a thing, and we're seeing less of that, as time has gone on. But the point being is you have a career journey. And I'm going to bring this back to beyond here for a moment. So that career dimension of life, there is something you want to accomplish in it, and that is very personal to you. And so the job that you're joining is one that should help you, contribute to get towards that. So as a flipping it around and being a leader or a manager on the other side, what I want to do is get the most out of that experience from you and also contribute to the most, because this is where we start to create that shared sense of outcome together. You're getting after things that are important for you, and I'm getting after things important for me. Well, this translates back into where I want to go in life for you personally. So if we're together for 10 years, great. Let's make it the best 10 years we possibly can. If it's 2, so on and so forth. It doesn't matter. But the point being is we got to learn from that. We got to learn and appreciate how having these generational experiences are fundamental to shaping both the team as well as that individual's journey. And well-being, we can talk about well-being or wellness or engagement, but all of this is really tied together in the workforce to driving towards performance and output. And so I'll leave it with one analogy here. I had a gentleman, I was running a very large planning session. I had a gentleman come in. He had been working for probably 50, 60 years at that point. So he knew his stuff. Like, he had done the same thing probably 2 dozen, 3 dozen, 4 dozen times. And that's what made him the expert. Like, there was not going to be any questions about him being able to get the job done. And don't get me wrong, like that's important sometimes, you know? So he comes in his planning, and the first thing is like, look, I got my stuff. Just tell me what you need when you need it, and we'll be good. Almost kind of waterfallish in nature. And I said, okay, well, can you just bear with me and go through the planning together? Like, let's just try it out. And he's like, yeah, okay. You know, almost begrudgingly, like, I got to spend time doing this. Like, you are getting paid to do it, by the way. So let's put that aside. But anyway, so we go through the whole planning. We get to the end, and I asked him to check in again, and he was like, this was amazing. I never expected anything. I was like, what do you mean? Like, I mean, almost like a 180 shift. He's like, look, he's like, I know what I have to get done, but now I could actually tie it into everybody else. And I didn't feel like I was just going to be rushing at the last minute to get everybody what they needed, which is, he's like, that's what I always used to do. So it was just commonplace for me. Now I actually felt like I could say, like, okay, I got to get these things done roughly this week, so on and so forth. And this is where I talk about, this is a difference. I mean, there's a guy who, you know, has been through the ringer more than once, has seen success and probably seen failures. And he took the chance with me and with the rest of the team to think about it differently. And we did the same with him. Like, I get it. I want to take from you and bring this in. And I think this is where we start to create the magic. And this is where, by leaning into the generational differences, by leaning into the diversity of thought, we can really drive some pretty radical changes and outcomes together. And I think that's the uniqueness. We just don't do it enough because we're uncomfortable about it, or we feel like vulnerability is an issue, you know, like, oh, I got to give up to somebody else. And some of this is just trying to help people move through that uncomfortableness to get them to a point where they can appreciate what we're doing, and then start to build the trust and the transparency along with that.
So would you say there's a pattern emerging here then, Andrew, which is kind of almost that you have to be able to get to this point, to be able to, either as a business or as an individual, you have to embrace curiosity. You have to be willing to change and bring change both into processes and into you as a person or as a team, and welcome it, not kind of try and push it back as that's not what we normally do. And that word normal, which I think, you know, certainly since pandemic, I think that's almost out of the dictionary, isn't it? You know, what is normal? I mean, I don't think any of us know. So it's kind of embracing those things and welcoming them in, because that is going to be how we're going to learn and grow and evolve, you know, both as humans, but also as businesses. That feels like a bit of a pattern emerging from what you're saying. Have I read that right?
You have, but I'm also going to say it's very hard for people to do. Like, it doesn't matter whether you're introverted, extroverted, it does not matter, because that is uncomfortable for everybody. Like, and this, we'll let that sink in for a moment. It's uncomfortable sometimes to be curious and say, I don't know the answer, or to be curious and say, I'm willing to do something differently than I have done it a dozen times. It's just uncomfortable. Like, it's not who we are human. We like to keep things simple. We like to keep things structured, regardless of how structured or unstructured your life is. Like, we like to know. And so it is important. But I think this is where leadership is so important, because it's going to come from leaders to help shape and mold that. You were talking about, like, well, this isn't what we normally do. And my response always to folks in that was, well, I'm not here because it's normally what you do. Like, you know, I'm here because we're kind of in this impossible situation, and they're looking for a different way of approaching it. And I can't say that I have the answers of how we're going to do it, but I do have a method of approaching it. And I just want you to come along for the ride. And if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work. Yeah. An example I give to folks is, or another one is, I had a team of developers. They had built this entire thing off of their experiences using Microsoft Azure. Nothing wrong with Microsoft Azure, you know, but the company decided they wanted to use Amazon. And that's okay. From a technology perspective, I apologize if we're going deep for listeners and whatnot. But I told them, you know, I was talking with the client on this, and I said, we have two options here. We can take a team that's been working on this for 2 years using Microsoft Azure, and we can hold on to them if they want to, and help them kind of retool themselves and train and learn how to run an AWS or Amazon's AWS for web services. Or we can get a brand new team. I said, both have their time, constraints to it. Like the new team needs to learn everything the old team already knew. The old team would have to learn something they've never done before. And I said, but if you ask me what I think is important, I'm going to tell you go with the old team, because the knowledge they have of what we're trying to do is so much more important than the technology. We can learn the technology, but the knowledge takes time and the understanding takes time. And so, they appreciated that. Like, and they also were willing to create space for that team to learn if they wanted to. That was the other thing. We gave them an on ramp to say, new opportunity here to learn something on our dime, or an off ramp to say, this isn't a space you want to be an expert in. So we're happy to, hold on to you so we can make some transition. And then, you can go on your way peacefully. And I think this is the examples of where leadership steps in to help create curiosity, but also to nurture it and to encourage those on the team to do something with it, and then give them the willingness, the opportunity to do it. But, sometimes it just requires that little bit of an extra nudge because we're human and we might not always want it.
Absolutely. So coming from all these different angles then, Andrew, I mean, we've come from the individual, from the team, from the challenges, from the strategy, from the technology there. Talk to us about Beyond. How does Beyond kind of support any of these different perspectives? Because I guess there'll be a lot of different perspectives from people listening to this thinking, I want to take this, I want to have a deeper look into this. I want to find out a little bit more. How does Beyond support people from all these different angles?
Well, one of the biggest things I like to tell people about is we're really a first of kind technology that actually looks to focus on all the dimensions of holistic wellness. So, and this isn't knocking, any app out there, because there are a lot of great apps out there that help you with your fitness. I mean, especially now with AI, the ability to just get hyper focused is fantastic. But what we don't want to lose sight of, and what we find important, is having more of that conversation about the macro. How is your life in balance? Because there really isn't anything out there really supporting you in that space and then helping you dive down a little bit. I would say we don't go all the way deep. That's where we look to partner with other technologies out there that are looking to be deep with you and the outcomes. But we want to be able to support you broadly. So this is a key aspect of us where we bring all the dimensions of holistic wellness together and we talk about them as journeys in life. So for individuals, what are all these journeys you want to have? Is it an adventure where you want to take an RV for a year and go travel the world? Is it, a career where you want to get into that senior exec sales role? Like, what are these journeys of life that are important to you? And therefore, what are the practices you start to instill in your day or day to day or week to week to really get after them? And we help to visualize all of that for the individual. Now, to your point, we've been talking a lot about not just the individual, but the organization. And a group we haven't talked a lot about is also practitioners, advisors, coaches, mentors. But these two other concentric circles. So if we talk about the individual, we talk about practitioners, and we talk about organizations, enterprises, companies, the growth opportunities are in the interdependencies or the interconnections between each of those circles. And that's where Beyond looks to play, is because we're thinking about the individual at the center, because we recognize the importance of practitioners in helping individuals grow, because we recognize the importance of organizations in that same mindset. We also have the ability then to bring common understanding together. So we're focused on all three of these dimensions for each kind of segment group, and then how you apply it in your life, or how, in the case of organizations, you apply it in the organization to be successful. So if somebody wanted to find out more about how we're approaching some of this, we talked a little bit about it today on the show, but you can go to beyondplatform.com and reach out to us to engage, because we are looking to have a different conversation about how to move forward with the future of work. Because what we are doing or what we're seeing is not working today. We're not seeing the trends go in the right directions. And I'm not saying it's astronomically going in the wrong direction, but there's room for improvement. And so it's time to start thinking about the change that's going to help us in the next 50 years, just same way other, I'll say, approaches have helped us in the last 50 years. It's time for that evolution. And the last thing I'll throw out here, why this is so much more important, is not only are we seeing us more conscious in the workplace around what we're doing, Part of that is because this is for the first time ever. Every generation working today has a different perspective on life. That wasn't always the case up to this point. And not only is it that every generation is different, because longevity is getting, we're all living longer because of longevity. I would argue we're going to see for the first time ever in our lifetime, not 4 generations consistently in the workforce, but 5. And so now, if we're struggling with different perspectives just today across 4, now let's talk about adding a 5th one in there. Let's talk about all of those different perspectives and what it means to really drive organizations forward. And I think this is the thing, the problem or the solution we're going after with Beyond in the enterprise world, tying it back to individuals at the center, which is really what we're passionate about. So a lot of things to go on there. But the important thing here is we're thinking about it. We're very consciously going after that big problem. We're looking to do it in a way that's different than what you have out there today. And we're really bringing in experts to make that happen.
Wonderful. I mean, I really do applaud you, Andrew, because I mean, this is just such an exciting journey. But to be, kind of really driving this forward, I think, it requires that holistic approach. And I think, you've just been so eloquent and clear about, things that we can do practically as individuals, but also, as organizations. So I would encourage everybody listening and watching this to go across to beyondplatform.com, and we'll put the link in the description below, but it's beyondplatform.com, and explore more deeply Andrew's work and the team that he has around him, because there's some incredible stuff that they're doing. So get into the conversation, and if you want to contact Andrew directly, I'm assuming, Andrew, people can get a hold of you on LinkedIn and through the platform itself.
Yep. You can follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, through the platform directly. There's a lot of ways to engage, and we'll definitely reach out and talk with you about this.
Wonderful. Andrew, thank you so much for your time today. It's been a really great conversation. I have about 1,000 more questions I wanted to ask you, but I know you're a busy guy. I need to let you go, but no, really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Neil. Appreciate the opportunity as well.